Hello and welcome to Game Changer. This show was created to inspire you with topics about coaching, positivity, mindset, and more. Warning, this is a live show. We go live because that's the most authentic way that we can show ourselves to you. What you see is what you get, and we go live every Wednesday at 3:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time with guests regularly appearing like today. And our motto is Together We Inspire. So let's get inspired today and talk about head, heart, and gut intelligence in a corporate world. I am joined today by my guest, Bea Rataj. She's an executive coach at a Fortune 50 tech company, as well as a private executive coach. And she is here to share her wisdom around tapping into and using 100% of our intelligence. Welcome, Bea.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel, for having me. I'm excited
You're
to be here.
welcome. Well, I'm going to go a little off the rails here and just ask you what it's like to work at a Fortune 50 tech company as a coach.
It's very interesting. Lots of experiences to be had. And I like working with leaders because they have a lot of impact. And when the leader changes, they change their teams. And when the teams transform, there is a possibility that the organization as a large can transform as well. So I find that really inspiring and count myself very fortunate that I've had the opportunity to be in high tech for so long and actually get to coach leaders.
Yeah. And I know that you also do individual private work. So tell us about your coaching methodology. Tell us about yourself as a coach.
Yeah. So for me, and you probably won't be surprised to hear this, that I'm an Enneagram 2. So I identify as an Enneagram 2. I feel I have an innate drive to serve and help people. And that's ever since the get-go, right? When I was little, it started with me wanting to be a nurse. When I was a teenager, the first thing that I read in a magazine or any newspaper was the advice column. I've always been interested in finding out what makes us human beings tick. And then when I started to work as a manager, eventually, when that rolled around, as part of the manager training, I attended a class that was called Foundations for Coaching. And in that class, we got to practice coaching on another person. And when I saw the light go on in my coachee's face, and she said, "Oh, I never thought about it like that." In that moment, I had an aha experience of my own. And I thought, "Oh, this is what I want to be doing for the rest of my life." So I went to the instructor after the class and I asked her, "How do I become a coach?" And, it took some jumping through hoops and all of that, but then the rest is history. And so since 2012, I've been coaching executives and leaders, as well as groups and teams in high tech at this Fortune 50 company. And I also just started working with nonprofits on, sort of as a side hustle, basically.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, and it's awesome to give back to those nonprofits. I've also worked with some of them, and it just feels really good when you get a chance to work with their leaders because they don't have the resources that a Fortune 50 tech company does. But with you, they do have a couple of those resources. So before we get into our topic specifically today, um, who in our audience is going to benefit the most from paying attention and listening to what wisdom you're sharing with us?
My ideal client is someone who is willing to step up to the plate and do the work. Do the work that is necessary to bring about transformation. And I feel that we change because we do the work. So I'm really looking for people who are committed to their personal and their professional growth, and yeah, who are really willing to look at themselves, be reflective, and follow through, be committed to the practices.
Yeah. Well, you've already shared a little bit about how you discovered coaching and how you broke into it. But how about your other life experiences? How have those influenced your coaching and your coaching practice?
Yeah, I was introduced to somatic work during the year through that I went through professional coaching school. And that school was focused on integral coaching. So, holistic approach to looking at the human being. And I always find that really attractive. And as part of the curriculum, we had some training in somatic experiencing. And in addition to that, we were all assigned a coach for that year. And the coach that was assigned to me during that year, she also used somatic practices with me. And what I noticed was that when my body understood something, that understanding was accompanied by a particular felt sense. And what I mean by that is an internal physical sensation. And that felt sense really acts like an anchor. The other thing I noticed was that that anchor was stronger than when I understood something only on an intellectual level. So I can tap into that felt sense more readily. And this is what piqued my curiosity. And then I went on to learn more about it. And so I'm really all about embodied leadership, using somatic practices in my sessions and also in the client's homework. Because as we all know, there is no replacement for conscious repetition, right?
No, there isn't. There isn't. It takes 30 days to break an old habit and 30 more to make a new one. So,
And
and
I think
speaking of
then
that,
some,
yeah.
right?
Yeah,
And
and
then
then
some.
some, yeah. And it could be even, yeah, it can be even more difficult depending on how ingrained that is, but that's
Yeah.
typically, you know. Um, and speaking of which, I love neuroscience. I know that we share that passion. How do you introduce neuroscience to your coaching clients, both in the internal world of the Fortune 50 company as well as your private practice?
I talk a little bit about the biology because when we have a grounding in biology, then people can relate to that. And one example is silence. So for us, it's really hard to sit in silence, right? People are so quick to jump in, and I think silence is really an underrated quality in our society. So minute something is quiet, we just want to like jump in. However, if we understand what happens in the brain when we ask a question and the other person is not answering right away, it means they're actually thinking about something new. So I'm not getting a canned response. And that means that new neural pathways are being built in the brain. So if we interrupt that process because silence is just too uncomfortable for us, then we don't give the other person the opportunity to be creative and to build those new pathways in their brain. So when I explain this, then that tends to make it easier for people to wait and give somebody else the time to really think about what it is that they want to say. You know,
I
coming up
have
with
I've
solutions.
had a lot of guests on my show, and you can tell that some of them also don't like to handle silence. I know that I struggle with that as well, but the faster we talk, the more difficult it is for our audience to keep up with us, to listen to us. So that I love hearing that take on it, and I think that that's brilliant. The whole idea of creating new neural pathways. Well, enough beating around the bush. You're here to talk to us specifically about the benefits of using all of our intelligences. And you mentioned head, heart, and gut intelligence centers. So, first of all, can you explain to us, to those uninitiated in the audience and myself, um, what you mean when you say head, heart, and gut intelligence? And secondly, what are the individual benefits of those intelligences?
Yeah. So I want to go back to neuroscience or continue with neuroscience, right? Originally, I thought that it was just about the brain. So I was wrong, I found out. And neuroscience really examines the structure and the function of the human brain, the nervous system, and the brain system. So all three, right? And then it maps them at a mechanistic level. And when I say brain system here, that is the physical brain as well as the larger intelligence that we can access throughout the body and beyond. So the three intelligence centers are our head, the physical brain that I just mentioned, and we use that for big picture thinking, for possibilities, analysis, decision making, those types of things. And then the larger intelligence is our heart center, associated with qualities such as warmth and emotion, connection, empathy. And then the gut intelligence, that's associated with instinct, intuition, courage, types of qualities. Antonio Damasio, he's a Portuguese American neuroscientist, and he says the first and second brain are your intestinal brain and your heart brain. And the third brain is the brain in your head. And that's actually in service of the other two brains. Basically, what he's saying is that more information gets passed from our gut and our heart to the brain, and then it gets processed up here, and then it streams throughout the whole body. And that's supported by data, because data is a good thing, right? And he says your gut cells send up to 90% more information to the brain than the brain sends to the gut. And the nervous system in your gut has up to 5 times more neurons than your spinal cord. So I think we can start to see that we have a lot more information at our disposal than we're actually aware of. And if we only use our head intelligence, then we're leaving a whole lot of data on the table. So that's how I get this started, right? And then I think you asked about the benefits as well, right? I had an experience recently that illustrates that pretty nicely. So I'll give you that, talk about that experience. Last week, a couple of weeks ago, I had asked a VP to do something for our team. And it was a pretty simple request, I thought. And she kept coming back with more and more questions. Right? Emails were flying back and forth, and I felt myself getting pretty frustrated. And as I noticed this frustration rising in my belly, and there's always a particular felt sense that comes with that when I'm frustrated, I thought to myself, hey, wait a minute here. So I took a moment to sit with that, and I did some breathing. And I asked myself, what is going on here? And I thought, she's circling the drain. And usually when people circle the drain, it means they don't feel heard. So that's what I realized. Oh, she doesn't feel heard. So I looked at her emails again, but this time, instead of coming from a place of frustration, I came from a place of curiosity. And I was thinking, what is it that she might be looking for that she's not getting from me? So I made a couple of guesses, put those in my email, and I said, hey, if this is indeed what you're looking for, then I want you to know that I'm committed to this outcome as well. And I added some steps regarding what I'd done already in order to make sure that we would achieve those outcomes. And lo and behold, she replied back within a few minutes saying, you're spot on. And we got a deal. And so my request was completed the next day. So that illustrates the benefits of using our 3 intelligence center really nicely, I think. And
Yeah,
if I were to, mm,
I just want to point out you didn't react to that gut instinct. You got curious and you went through it and you pulled
yeah,
information out of it.
yeah,
So that's remarkable.
yeah, it doesn't always happen, but when it happens, it's magic, right?
Yeah. Well, we're learning.
We're
And it's a
learning.
lot
Yeah,
easier when you have an extra person there asking you questions and helping you tap into those gut instincts as a coach than it is to just apply it at yourselves. Like coaches are human beings too. We benefit from having coaches as well.
very much so. That's right. Yeah, yeah. So I think some of the benefits that show up is really greater resilience. Like we can operate from a wider emotional bandwidth, which you just mentioned. Like I tapped, um, I didn't react to it, and then more self-awareness, which provided just that little bit of space that allowed me to move from reaction to response, right? And then all of a sudden, I had a choice, and I was able to communicate better. So better communication is part of that. And I had the wherewithal to practice reflective listening. And then that led to collaboration, better collaboration, and teamwork. So really, resilience, self-awareness, communication, collaboration, all those are valuable benefits, I would say.
Yeah. So that, and it sounds like those are some of the benefits of listening to your gut intelligence. What about your heart and your head intelligence? I mean, there's most of us are in tune with our head intelligence because that's a loud voice. But what about
Right.
heart intelligence, I guess, is really what I want to know.
Yeah. So I think the example illustrates all three, actually. And I feel my gut said, hey, wait a minute, what's really going on here? She doesn't feel heard, right? So that's the gut. The heart said, let me do some reflective listening here. What might she be looking for? And then came the empathy piece, right?
Yeah.
And the head found the words to put on the page in my email. And so that's using all three, I made a better decision, more informed decision. And that got got the request done and got it
So
done fast.
that is a really good example, and I hadn't thought about the heart and the mind connection there. So thank you for illustrating those. Um, so you mentioned three separate intelligences, and it sounds like they can work together or kind of come together. So is that what I'm hearing? And if so, what does that achieve for people? What does that achieve for executives specifically?
Well, so as I said, right, the example, all three do work together. We just have to become aware of it. And the one that we usually don't tap into is our body. And that's why I like somatics and this embodied leadership um, thinking or methodology, right? And the word, if I talk a little bit about somatics, to explain that, the word somatics comes from the Greek word soma, which means body, or more precisely, the living body in its wholeness. And somatics explores the relationship between the body and the mind, and then the ways in which they influence each other. So there's this felt sense that I spoke about that we can access, and we do that through somatic practices. And those practices typically involve internal sensations and then experiences of the body. Because we tend to live from the neck up, like mostly in here, and especially in corporations, right? Everything is always about thinking, and we forget that we have a body until it doesn't do what we wanted to do. And then we're like, wait, what? You're not working? What's wrong, right? So one of the techniques is mindfulness. So for example, checking in with yourself, right? What's happening in your body in this very moment? And so then actually let me ask you, Daniel, what is happening in your body right now? If you
Pain.
were to check
Yeah.
pain.
Yeah, pain in my shoulders, which is a kind of a constant for me, um but there's a lot of change going on in my life right now. A different routine for the this week going forward, and so I can feel that going on for myself.
Great. So that's a check-in, right? Mindfulness, applying some mindfulness here. You see pain in your shoulder. And so in a session, I would also ask you, though, what does that pain look like? And does it have a message for you, right? Does it move around? Like all those types of things. Maybe does it show up as a cartoon character or something like that? So, we can work with that, or that's what I would do in a session. Yeah.
Imagine that working with executives, working especially in the tech field, with all of those headspace people, that it can be very difficult to talk about emotions and talk about those somatic feelings. How do you introduce those topics to your client? How do you draw that out of them and make it comfortable?
Yeah, I talk about emotions as data, and engineers love data. So, so we've been taught to, or yeah, taught to leave our emotions at the door, right, when we go to work. But we're human beings, and so that doesn't really work, right? What happens at home influences us at work, and what happens at work influences how we show up at home. So when I talk about emotions as data, engineers love data, and more data is better. So they seem to relate to that, and it resonates with them. And then I say, why would you want to leave a whole bunch of data on the table by using only your head? So if you include your body, we have a lot more data and we can make better decisions. So
Yeah.
that's one way I talk about that.
That makes sense. And it's also impartial data too, right? Because so much of the time we control our thoughts, we judge our thoughts, we force our thoughts into narrow little bandwidths, and yet with our gut intelligence specifically, like that's impartial data. We don't have as much control. You pointed out that 90% more information comes from the gut than goes to the gut. So, of course, we don't have control over those sensations. So I love that. I love that idea of treating it as data. Uh, you you and I've talked about feeling your feelings and the importance of making sure that you feel your feelings. So I guess I want you to tell us a little bit more about that in relation to somatic and heart intelligence.
Yeah. You've probably heard of name it to tame it.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So
A
there's
lot.
something, yeah, a lot, right?
I
That's sort
talk
of
about it all the time. So,
that's our bread and butter, right?
yeah.
As coaches. There's something physiological that happens when we become aware of what we're feeling. There's an inner connecting that's happening, and our nervous system calms down, and our body goes, "Ha," and it does this big out breath, right? Hmm. And I love what Viktor Frankl says about between stimulus and response, there's a space. So when we do this, like our body is going into that space. And that's when we get to this place of choice where we can then choose to respond versus reacting. And whatever we do after that is much more likely to create connection with another person than putting more noise in the system. So that's one way we talk about it, naming it to tame it, to tame it.
Yeah. It also reminds me of validation. It reminds me a little bit of listening to those thoughts and feeling them and recognizing them for what they are, because that validates the fact that they exist. And oftentimes when we're upset and we get a little bit of validation, it just calms us down. So it makes
Yeah.
sense. It's almost like self-validation to
Yeah.
really like look at those feelings and to feel them and to recognize them.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, side note, that I've heard a lot about somatic therapy. I haven't heard a lot about somatic coaching until I met you. Um, but somatic therapy is about learning to feel your emotions, to feel your feelings, which a lot of us try to ignore or try to judge or put down. And so it sounds like there's a lot of consistency there in terms of somatic coaching and somatic therapy.
Oh, yeah, I think so. Sometimes some of the leaders are surprised when they get emotional in our sessions. I had one person who said, "Oh my God, I don't know what's happening. I don't cry usually." And then she, you know, I think she had a lot of emotions bottled up over the years and just not a safe place where she could express that. And so it was bubbling to the surface. Yeah.
So, speaking of bottling things up, a lot of times, I think a lot of the stresses in life, in work life, happen when we're bottling up what our own needs are, because we're putting our role first, we're putting our job first, we're letting our own personal lives kind of go to seed, if you'll take that analogy. Um, and I know that you've seen that with your clients. So where do your personal needs come in with corporate coaching? Because I know that when you're working with a company, when you're an internal coach, that can be kind of a tricky area. So how do you handle those kinds of situations?
Do you mean my personal needs or
No, your
needs
client,
in general?
your
My
client.
clients' needs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're human, you have needs, and there's simply no way around it, right? Even if we don't know what that those are. Marshall Rosenberg, maybe you've heard of him. He created the methodology called nonviolent communication, and he says that everything human beings do, we do because we're trying to meet a need of ours. I think that's so beautiful, and I always try to remember that when there's conflict, it is about unmet needs. And we typically have unskillful strategies in order to try to meet those needs. So that's something that I keep in mind. And at work, some of the needs might be around clarity, competence, right? Challenge, autonomy, respect, trust. So these are all needs that show up in the workforce. Problem is that we haven't been taught to identify those needs and let alone name them. So when I started this, I actually had a cheat sheet where it had feelings on one side and needs on the other. And I looked at them to try to figure out, well, what is my need that is connected to this particular feeling that I'm feeling right now? It was a little bit easier for me to identify feelings, but the cheat sheet was really good. Typically, we live between happy, sad, glad, and mad. And Brene Brown, you probably know of her. She says in order to be emotionally fluent, we need to be able to distinguish between 30 different emotions. So in the coaching sessions, we learn how to do just that, right? Identifying our emotions, connecting them to our needs, and then learning how to make requests. And then I think also important, observe what impact does this have on your relationships and on your environment. And so then the proof is in the pudding, right? And so all that feelings and needs topic is a topic in and of itself. We could talk about that for a long time.
Absolutely, we could. And and so in the interest of time, because this is only a 30-minute
Oh
show,
yeah.
so you are an incredibly well-read, well-rounded coach. You have a breadth of knowledge, and I'm sure that there are people just dying to have you as their personal coach. If someone is interested in that, they're watching this show, how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, they can email me directly at Bea, BEA, at mindsitepdx.com. So mind, MIND, site, SIGHT, and then PDX because I'm in Portland.com. Or LinkedIn is also a good place to get in touch with me.
And I'll make sure that those links get posted in a comment that's
Oh,
pinned
perfect.
at the end of the show.
Great.
So
Thank you.
thank you so much for being with us. Before you go, though, I want to see if you could do one really difficult task for me, and that is if you could summarize for us with one golden nugget or one little grain of wisdom before we go today. What would that be?
I would say pay attention to your body and what it tells you, and learn how to tap into your head, heart, and gut intelligence, and then use all the wisdom that your body has to offer. And that might just change your life. That's what I would say.
Probably will. It probably will. Well, thank you so much, Bea, for being part of our show and joining us today. And audience, thank you so much for watching. Since you've stuck around this long, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like this video. And if you wouldn't mind, leave us a comment with what inspired you the most about the show today. And show up next week. We're going to be live on Wednesday at 3:30 with more personal coaching, mindset, and positivity. And I'll see you then. Bye.
Thank you.